We are live, so welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at Pickaxe, along with co-host Joshua Morgan, content marketer extraordinaire, and of course, David Finkelstein, Pickexe's co-founder and CEO. Today's guests are co-founders from Pickaxe. We have Joshua Dern, the co-founder and CEO, as well as Gabe Fabius, co-founder and COO. So with 20 plus years of leading digital strategy, content, and transformation in emerging technologies at leading major media corporations and building startups, Joshua Dern loves figuring out the hard stuff. Formerly, he was the Senior Vice President, GM of social media at Viacom Media Networks, and then MTVN, and then CPO at Bedrock Media Ventures, award-winning products head at Huge, and HBO Go, TMN, and more, and former VP Digital at Atlantic Records. Gabe, he helps bring ideas to market. He has successfully brought products conceived on napkins to store shelves and help expand and enhance many products and services from diverse industries, spanning from media, mobile, financial, e-commerce, to energy markets, to exponentially increase revenue for all of them. And he's managed multi-million-dollar projects to get projects launched on time and on budget. So he's the former senior program manager at NBC, SiriusXM, Daily Candy, and more. Noted expert in launching complex products and managing large-scale software projects. So thank you both so much for being here, Joshua and Gabe. Could you both please share a little about yourselves? And also, could you please tell the listeners about Pickaxe and your role there? So whoever wants to go first. Joshua, would you like to start?
Sure. So, I spent a long time in various corporate roles, owning P&Ls, running divisions, and then shifted into the startup world. And during all that time, I, as someone who was very data driven and wanted to be able to get questions about my data answered very easily, I found it very difficult.
Whoever wants to go first.
Is that me? Sorry.
No, that's okay. Actually, it could have been me.
Mic problem.
And so, this was a common theme throughout my career of looking for data, trying to get answers, struggling to get answers from the data. And somewhere along the line, as I was kind of building startups and in that world, I met Gabe. We started working together on a few projects. And then we brought our friend Andrew into the mix, and we all shared this similar set of interests. And we were hearing from our consulting customers that they were having all these problems. We said, hey, why don't, like any origin story, we said, we can solve this. This is something that we have passion for, we love to do, we're super nerds about it, and we have ideas of how to do it better. And that's kind of how I came to be a part of Pickaxe and what my origin story. Gabe, you want to give yours?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. If you haven't figured it out, I'm a launch guy by trade. So people come to me and they're like, okay, we've got this idea, this is what it is. They maybe have a P&L, hopefully. And then how do we bring that to life? How do we get it out there? What's the team, work streams, et cetera? How do you assemble all that and actually launch on time, on budget? So that bit of it in the consulting practice, which is part of what we have at Pickaxe, is what I lead. And I've been doing that for 1,000 years. And Joshua, myself, and Andrew actually, the three of us actually worked together on a few launches together. And then as part of that, not just the launch, but then how do you track the success? How do you make sure that it's getting better, that the thing is actually growing, et cetera, you're hitting your subs number, whatever that is. We were actually doing the work in Excel spreadsheets, in databases, collating disparate data sets. And that was a bit of the genesis also of Pickaxe and the data platform that you see today. So we're not only data guys and gals, but we're also on the business end as well.
That's great. Good stuff, guys. Great to meet you both. Appreciate you joining us today. You guys obviously have some interesting experience, backgrounds in product development, program management, and operations, the works. And it looks like Pickaxe does some really interesting stuff with data, as you know, Pickaxe does as well. And really, we concentrate on helping our customers improve their ad performance through quality data, removal of things like ad fraud and things like that. I'm curious, from your perspective, and I guess in both of your words, and maybe we get a two different perspectives, how Pickaxe helps customers use data to improve their ad performance.
Great. I guess
Josh, you're first. We got to pick something.
So I think what we find is that there's a bunch of areas where customers tend to need help, but a lot of it also depends on where they are in a life cycle. And so there's a big difference between someone who's launching a product and all of the issues they're facing when they're first launching versus someone who's in maybe a more mature state who is looking to optimize every dollar they spend to get the best return on ad as they're kind of evolving. And so there's not like one size fits all. It's a little bit different depending upon who they are, what they're experiencing, but there are a few commonalities, right? Like everyone's asking, hey, can I trust that I'm spending my money in the right way? Can I trust my data? Is it giving me all the right answers? Is it accurate? And oftentimes it's also, can I trust my agency? Are they telling me all the right things? Have they set things up in the right way? Are the pixels performing the way they need to be performing? And kind of everything in between. And so that's oftentimes where we're brought in to help in any number of those areas, from initial strategy to the MarTech system set up, data collection. Is the data schema correct? Are the right data points being collected in the right way? Are they being sent to downstream systems that need them in the right way, so that choices that you're making can be made better, faster? And then we also employ, we have various machine learning models that are already trained to help do things like test for campaign effectiveness. So we can tell pretty quickly whether a campaign that you're running is optimal compared to other campaigns that you're running or have run in the past.
Yeah, my take is slightly different, but the same. Certainly, the maturity of the business is one thing. I think the other thing is everybody's like, we want to be data-driven decision marketers and all that. And certainly CMOs and marketing teams, like, it's very difficult to be able to do that. One is because of the underlying systems, but also, like, do you have the maturity, like, as an organization to be able to do that? So what we find is, everywhere there are people that they're in Excel spreadsheets, they're downloading data. These are like signals, and we start to see a lot of Excel, and they're trying to join data and all that. We're like, okay, we know you're trying to do this action, and how do we operationalize the data in a way that makes sense, right? And operationalize it could mean, like, can I do the analysis to actually make a good decision about what network to use? But it's also operationalize it, whereas I want to be able to do drip campaigns. I want to be able to do, like, all these CRM functions. I want to be able to cohort, all of those things. So how do we operationalize the data? So, there is a data everywhere, but not a drop to drink real thing that we solve. And the thing that we're looking at is, like, how do we actually say, okay, these are the 3 bits of data they need to transmit between all the systems, subscription, activity, whatever it is, and then how can we take action against it? If it's taking some poor person, and we've probably all done it, 10 hours to do their job, we're probably not doing it right. So those are, like, that's the way that we also look at it.
Very interesting. I like how you put that, data everywhere, but not a drop to drink. So true. And sort of switching gears to a bigger question, I guess here, kind of general. Gabe and Joshua, how do you see the future of data being used in marketing and advertising?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question everyone kind of wrangles with. I don't think it's a new question. I think it's always been the thing. But the good news, and as a consumer, right, I actually I am a person who cares about data privacy, and I think there's always going to be a need to strike the balance between how we protect our own data for ourselves and how we allow companies to use our data effectively. But I think it just means companies have to be smarter and evolve better practices internally for how they collect data, how they create better value propositions to convince users to provide data to them, right? And and then from there, there's going to be lots of different ways to use data. Everything from better data clean rooms to mix first and second party data together and create data products that are available to your customers, But ultimately, in the end of the day, it just means getting a lot smarter. You're going to have to be smarter with what you do, smarter with the choices you make, and smarter with how you use it. And if you're a company that's spent your business relying on third-party data, then probably you're going to have to evolve a lot more than someone who has relied primarily on first-party data.
And what we've also found is, like, as I'm sure you know, like CDPs are obviously in vogue right now to actually be able to do this. I think the other bit around this is so you have your own first-party data, but then also being able to leverage cross-device, cross-platform, like that it's Gabe, even if I haven't actually provided you that it's me, like that it's like generally me. I'm coming from the same IP or whatever it is. Somehow you've got that identifier. That I've been on iOS, Android, I've been in my house, right? And you've been able to personalize or target based on all of that data. So again, like the evolution is really that people are identifying who you are and then creating a rich profile around that with all of your behavior so you can target for whatever you need to do.
Yeah, and all of it starts with how you collect first-party data in the first place. Like how smart you are about what you're collecting, when you're collecting, how you're collecting, the form and structure of it. Then you can analyze your data better, cohort better, segment better, understand what your customers are doing, what's driving them, what's motivating them. If you're a content company, what content works, what drives retention, what drives acquisition, right? At the end of the day, no matter what your service is, acquisition, retention are kind of the only two things that matter. And if you don't understand the things that you do that actually work with acquisition or work with retention, then you're not going to win no matter what, or you're just going to be renting customers constantly. Sometimes maybe it's good practice to rent customers, but generally speaking, you want to own the customer, not rent the customer.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is what we find is there are people who will type in the URL or use the app every single day, whatever that is, right? Those people you don't need to worry about. They're coming back no matter what. And then there's low engagement customers, and then there is some bit of like, okay, you're going to try and save them or whatever that is, and you spend some dollars around that. And then, at some point you have to cut them off because it doesn't make economic sense. And then the real action is the people that are like in the middle, right? Where you have some capability to influence their action to make them a little bit stickier. They like to look at cookie recipes, but you're showing them sports articles. Like, how do we go ahead and like intonate that and then be able to do that, right? So we do a lot of work around like using our heuristic to understand that map and that mental map for users.
I think the other last point is that, and this is kind of what Gabe was saying earlier, the problem 10 years ago was, how do I get access to data? I don't have enough data. Yeah. That's not the problem now. I mean, everyone is swimming in data. They have more data than they know what to do with. And few people are actually using the data well. So the challenge has definitely become, how do I get smarter about my data? How do I make sure my data is in business ready format and structure? Like it's something that's easy for the people at the company to ask questions of the data, get the answers they need. So there's definitely a shifting from like, it was all big data. That's all everyone would talk about. And, everyone's got big data now. Like, who doesn't have a data?
Data swamp.
Yeah, it's a data swamp, exactly. And so how do you evolve from the data swamp to something that is a much more effective way to get answers that will be effective in how you manage your marketing spend and impact the approach to moving into the market?
And probably everybody on here knows that, if you talk to marketers or data engineers, and we work with everyone like in between, everyone's like, I want all the data, but that's not really what they mean. Like, that's what everybody says because you have an opportunity and you want to get as much as possible. But really what you want is specific sets of data to answer like what's the health of my business, ultimately, whatever your KPIs are around that. And then that is a very limited set of data. Everything else ends up being behavioral.
A lot of noise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think from my perspective, we're in a really interesting transition time right now where, like you said before, everyone was, just trying to get their hands on data in the past. Now there's so much data. But what's really interesting about that is now there is so many more tools out, and it will continue to be more and more that will enable people to use data in more effective ways. And so I think that's where we're in a really interesting time where I think that there's a lot more demand from advertisers today to generate performance from their advertising. In some ways, I think some of that was kicked off by COVID, because prior to COVID, people it was, advertise online, programmatic, throw all your money in there. But then after, through COVID and now after, I think that a lot of companies, budgets got, shrunk. And so they started to say, okay, well, we still have to advertise. So now we have to do it more effectively. How can we do it more effectively? Okay, data. Yeah, okay. That's one way we can do it more effectively. And so now people are starting to concentrate a lot more on using data to be more efficient in their ad campaigns and their ad targeting.
Interestingly, on the COVID beat, we do quite a bit of work with sports content and people who own that. So of course, during COVID, no sports occurred, right? So it was actually the best A/B test you could ever have, because sports normally is happening all the time. So now what we found is, what's all of your evergreen content, right? Because people want to see, somebody like lift up the Stanley Cup, right? And we saw all of that was normally all the way at the bottom, right? It was never like in the top bit. That was all evergreen content, and then you can create an SEO strategy around it, or and all of that. So we found opportunities with that data, and then they can repackage it and still have pretty good numbers, in spite of COVID, actually.
Mm-hmm. Totally, and I think the other side of the coin of what you said is the tool part is shifting, and obviously we have a little bit of a bias because we have our own tool here. Is moving away from gatekeepers, right? The challenge in the big data world 10 years ago was it took a lot of infrastructure, expertise, support, knowledge to be able to stand up the tooling that was required to be able to do anything. And even then, you needed people that know proprietary markup languages or how to structure SQL queries really well. And so I think the movement, and certainly our platform is one of the things that's kind of moving in that direction, leading that space, is automation so less work, especially routine work that is done every day. So automate all of that, and also make it simpler for marketers, people who are the frontline business people, to be able to ask questions directly without having to go to somebody else on a different team. Like, don't make them go to the data analyst to have the data analyst write a query for them, because they're the only ones that know how to write SQL. But find ways to make it easier for everybody to get answers as fast as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh, for pointing out to me that it looks like we got a question from the audience.
Well, that was kind of my question, was before my question, because this is a great one from Daniel, who asked, what are the most important KPIs a company should look at to get their direction decisions for their market? So Josh, since we share an awesome name together, I'll ask you to go first, and then Gabe.
So I don't think there's any one. I think there is no one KPI. I think it always depends upon the business and what they're doing. So obviously, when we work with individual companies, that is the first questions that we ask. The first thing that we do is validate use cases, understand the KPIs that are critical to their business. At the end of the day, they're driving towards some kind of top line number somewhere. Or a bottom line number somewhere. And so that our goal is to make sure they all understand what the KPI is that they're driving towards. And when we find the most dysfunction is because we find companies that cannot tell you what the most important KPIs are that they should be driving towards. But, clearly when it comes to digital marketing, the one thing that you don't really want to see is people looking at just kind of top line marketing metrics like CPM rates or things like that. I mean, it's really longer term value type stuff. Like, what's the LTV you're driving? So it's a deeper set of questions about not just dollars in, somebody comes out, but it's really like, is it the right dollars in the right source, delivering the right customer? And that customer is the customer you want to get, who's performing the behaviors that are the ideal behaviors. And if you can't identify what those behaviors are, then that's where you run into a problem. So a lot of the work that we'll do is figure out what are the triggering behaviors that we can identify as the kind of archetype of who you're looking for. Is it they buy 3 products? Is it that they, if it's a subscription video service, how many number of streams they need to have at what time period before they kind of hit the trigger of this? They've sent the signals to say this is the right kind of customer. And then once you know that, that's your core KPI that you can then say, let me go find more of those customers. What are the things that you can identify as churn risk? What are the things that you can identify as high retention, elements of your service, and then drive all your marketing efforts around those things.
Yeah, and I think that the other bit here is just the, like as Dern was saying, it's cost per acquisition, retention, churn if you're in a subscription business. Like that's true for everybody. We know that, right? But also different teams have different KPIs. The marketer, what they're really interested is driving people to the landing pages. And then usually there's a product person that then is picked up, right? Then it's like, okay, it is my job at this point going forward to have them convert in the funnel, right? So how do you match that? There's a real difference in KPIs because one is spend based and one is conversion based. And how do we identify those, because they're not always the same? And then how do we make sure that the data interconnects, and even from a people and process bit, are actually that this is glued together as well? Like certainly we've been on calls where like, well, our job is to get people to the landing page. Your job is to make sure that they convert, right? And how do we go ahead and we structure this where it's more bound together? Again, this is a bit of a people thing. Like systems don't fix that. That's like people stuff. So we do diagnose that quite a bit as well, because really it's the integration of those teams.
And it is a little bit of the above and below, because there's the part of it that's like there's a higher level kind of roll up thing of, hey, this is the strategy that gets some people here, but then it's really the cohorting after that, right? Like, not depending upon what your business is, what your service is, you're probably don't have one customer. You probably have a set of personas that you can match, and different kind of intrinsic or extrinsic ways and needs that they have that you can use to leverage your marketing against. And how do you identify that at a little bit of a lower level? So you don't want to just look at things and say, what's the, I just put this campaign out and this campaign drove this return. This was the ROAS for that particular campaign. You have to really understand it at a one level lower, in terms of this campaign reached this particular cohort of users really well, but not this other cohort of users really well.
And I think the other bit with that is, again, sometimes what we see is marketers, again, getting people to landing page, like even if they do convert, we'll see that you did in fact get a lot of customers, but the LTV is super low. They're only around for a month, right? So like, are they a high quality customer? Like, does the CPA and the arbitrage between those two things make sense? So we look quite a bit at that. And then when you are a customer, we like to do things where we score customers. Maybe there's like users that are in cohort A, B, and C. Some are, and some are stickier than others. How do we move people into the A cohort? Like, what are those people exhibiting? And can we go ahead and show people a different breadth of things to get them into that other cohort? So constantly trying to move them up and create a custom or experience that they'll go ahead and be stickier with.
And another really common problem is a lot of the networks will try to claim the same person.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, and I'm sure this is something you're very familiar with, is customers are also often asking us to help them. Hey, Facebook and Google are both trying to claim this person. Who should get claimed for them? And that's a very common problem.
Yeah, you guys make really good points, and I think the best point driven there is everybody's KPIs are different, right? So we really need to understand the business to determine what is the best KPI for you and what your goals are, right?
Yeah,
it's excellent.
So I am kind of curious here because I had an experience not too long ago where my daughter decided that she wanted to take a horror writing class, right? And I said, well, cool. And she wanted me to take it with her. And I thought, okay, we can do this. I hadn't searched up horror writing classes or anything like that. So I get on Facebook, and the very first ad that pops up is, hey, we're running a discount on this horror writing class. Like, and I'm kind of spooked out by the whole thing. But at one point I was like, oh my God, I don't have to go and search now for anything because it knows exactly what I want. But on the other hand, that's really, really kind of spooky that, like, I don't, Big Brother's listening or something like that. So what are you guys most excited about and kind of paranoid about when it comes to like data and using in marketing and advertising?
Yeah, I mean, really what you're seeing there is the ad network is actually working the way that it should, right? It's not that it's listening to you, right? Probably someone in your house, your daughter, et cetera, looked it up, right? Like she went on some site, it got picked up, you figured out that you're in the same household, right? And then you got served that. That's like it's working as designed. But it is spooky for sure. I think we all are like, is this thing listening to us, right? We've all had that.
Yeah, I think there's always has been and always will be a trade-off between convenience and privacy. And I think giving people the ability to make those choices for themselves, I do think is exciting, because it's just a better experience all around for the users to be able to decide, hey, I'm willing to trade some of that because I like the convenience, or I'd rather it takes a little bit more effort for me to search a little harder because I don't want, my privacy infringed in that way. So I'm actually excited about those changes, and I do think there is always the potential for there to be kind of creep factor. And as a product person at the core, as someone who focuses on product experience more than anything else, I think that's the thing that's got to drive it, right? Create great experiences that people want to use. And if you create great experiences, then the rest, will ultimately work until you hit some kind of maturity point where you've hit a ceiling. And then it's like, to steal a phrase from Gabe, you're trying to get more juice out of the squeeze, which of course is a natural point that everybody is going to hit. But I think that, what is exciting is having the ability to get faster answers, to see things in real time, understand what's happening. And even just from a pure marketing perspective, if you go back in time, all above the line TV advertising, it took a long time to try to really understand the impact that those dollars were having. And even then, it wasn't really empirical. You create loose models, you build kind of statistical analysis, and you'd hope that your direct response or your TV ads were working. And to some extent, you knew they were, because if you were selling a product, you sold more. But now we have this almost immediate feedback loop. You turn dollars on, you start seeing things happening right away. You can shorten the cycle much, much better in terms of like how fast before you can move the ship and make choices. And I don't think any of the, any data privacy or any changes in cookie is going to change that. I think the fact is we're able to collect more data. We're able to understand that data on our own services. It's easier to do that than ever before. There's great tools for it. It's cheaper than ever, and we can get smarter.
Yeah, I think everybody's heard me say it 100 times. I'm a big proponent of ethical use of data to improve the consumer experience. And so anytime you can, improve the experience, I'm all for it. I think that's and that's where we're going. The more, targeted we can become, and the more sort of, transparent in the use of the data, the more creative and more, just a better experience you're going to see throughout, whether it's just going to, a website and you're shopping, or whether you're watching, CTV, linear TV never really caught up to it, but, now with CTV, we have the ability to target ads in ways that you could never do with regular linear TV. So you're going to see an improved experience there as well.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that linear has now caught up, and there is now programmatic ad targeting enabled in at least on cable head ends, not obviously broadcast simulcast.
Yeah, broadcast.
But for sure, it's the world has changed drastically and keeps changing. But I think ethical use, it's a great way to think of it, as ethical use of data is critical. But it's the end that you're trying to do is the important thing to remember. And if you're creating a great service, collect the right data in the right form, and then use it to make your service better. And then the rest, will come.
Yeah, we're big into that whole user data bit is sacrosanct, right? Like, you don't really care that it's Gabe Fabius and my email address, right? You actually care about everything else more than that, right? But obviously with data breaches and all that, that's become important too. And we also operate quite a bit in GDPR territories where things are a bit more opt-in based. So that of course creates a different set of policies that you need to enact. But certainly within those environments, there's quite a lot of data to go ahead and do exactly what you need to do in real time.
Very interesting. So David, Joshua, Gabe, this is for all of you, but a couple weeks ago, maybe it was just 2 weeks ago, AdExchanger had an article about the confusion that was being created around all the hype, just around the cookieless future. Specifically, they pointed to the fact that first-party cookies aren't going anywhere. So, and we're calling it the cookieless future. We're creating some confusion around it. Would you all be able to share your ideas and inspiration to listeners in ways that they will be able to use their own first-party cookies, even after cookie deprecation, Google's cookie deprecation? But also, is there any other confusion that you think is coming up with all this hype?
Yeah.
Joshua, go ahead.
Sure. So, I mean, I think it is one of those things where there is always, like, there's a whole new now thing. Everyone's calling it zero-party data.
Yeah.
I mean, it's first-party data. Like, why do you need to come up with a new name for it? So there's this thing where everyone's got to come up with names for things. And I guess, just since I brought it up, zero-party data is, I guess, consented first-party data. That's the clarification point of it. But I think the reality is there is no issue with first-party cookies. You could collect tons and tons of data without a cookie regardless, right? So the cookie is the misnomer. It's a little bit of a red herring there. The cookie makes your life a little easier when it comes to first-party data, but it's not a necessary thing at all. So even if cookies were completely deprecated, it wouldn't stop you from being able to collect first-party data and use first-party data in very, very smart ways. You're just pushing things to the server side instead of the client side, but you could still do every single thing that you would otherwise do client side. So it's just more of an engineering task than it is a business change. But I do think there's obviously going to be massive impact in terms of third-party data and third-party cookie tracking, and that is going to change for a lot of businesses, particularly people who are selling advertising, but also buyers who are looking to do things like retarget and having more options of where they're hitting their customers and what they understand about their customers.
Yeah, I think the other bit that we've been involved in with first party data doesn't necessarily mean cookies. It's lots of people enriching their own user data using data brokers, right? So if you know 6 things about me, right? Maybe you get my voter records, maybe you get household income, right? Like you learn more, right? This is data that's available out there. So again, building a rich customer profile about a user and then being able to customize, and of course you can advertise against that as well. But there's quite a bit of that going along as well. I mean, Facebook is the largest identity database on this planet, right? Like it really is. So they know everything. So in a lot of ways, companies that we have been working with are actually catching up. Like they're like, okay, like now we can see like the value in this, and they're starting to catch up to that.
And so one of the biggest challenges we see is building a good identity graph. That's a real challenging thing for most companies, particularly if they're at scale, and particularly if they don't require login on every single interaction. So building identity graph becomes really, really, really hard. But one of the things that we do with a handful of our customers is we help them do things like build data clean rooms that will enable them to do, as Gabe has just said, enrich their data, bring in data from trusted second parties that they have relationships with, as well as third-party data brokers, and then use that in privacy compliant ways that are fully adhering to kind of the ethical guidelines that both that are set in law, but also that the individual company is following.
Yes, interesting stuff. We did get another question from the comments. So Amir's asking, is Google the largest database? Their AI is better? ?
I was saying Facebook identity database. Like, you have to put in your first name, last name, right? You put in your picture, right? Like it knows like actual ID, like user level, right? Knows more than, bigger than the US government, bigger than any country, right? It's all of us together have opted in to provide that data all over the world, billions and billions and billions and billions.
Right. Like Facebook has a lot of explicit PII that you've granted every time you create your profile and things like that. Google obviously tried to introduce products to do that, but they've got Gmail. So certainly there's no question that they're both. It's quibbling. They're both massive, and they both have very large data sets. But the reality is, though, if you look at the third-party data brokers, they've got the biggest data sets because they actually have every single household.
Yeah,
they've got the voting records.
And going back to the whole first-party data thing, and I think it's important to note that nothing changes for Google, nothing changes for Amazon, nothing changes for Facebook. Like they're all still going to be able to track what you do on their website and be able to, and in their app or whatever, and be able to target better to you based on all the data that you're providing to them.
And to be clear, they're collecting the data still, right? They're just not making it available to everybody else. So, there's a bit of nuance there, right? They're still doing it. Apple is still, everybody is still doing it. It's just about its availability to everyone. So,
yeah, I think that nobody has anything to worry about when it comes to first-party data. I mean, other than following legal guidelines about how to store it, that you have to remove it, you need consent, good things that are actually probably correct and proper. But first-party data is not going anywhere.
Yeah, and you actually touched on some points that we talked about in our last podcast, which was compliance and making sure people that are collecting the data, that they're protecting that data, that they are actually have the right security measures in place and things like that, so that data doesn't get breached. As
a matter of policy for Pickaxe, for our SaaS platform, we do not collect PII. We just won't. We don't have to for the type of work that we do.
Yeah.
And we do see that as a huge challenge, especially when we work with large enterprise. There's a lot of catch up there where they've invested so much money in building systems and storing data in certain ways, and suddenly now they need to change certain aspects of that. That could be very problematic. I mean, if you're building something from scratch, it's a little easier to kind of get it right from the beginning. Whereas if you're retrofitting something that already exists,
always harder.
It's a little bit harder. Plus, the policies change. So as the marketplace is evolving and people have to make choices how they handle those things.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's become a junior data privacy officer, right? In some ways, for sure.
Good point.
Absolutely. Yep. Anything else on that you guys want to add, or anything on the use of first-party cookies and what marketers can be doing to utilize those?
I mean, I think it just comes down to if you remove the word cookie and you just think, am I collecting the right data? That's really what it boils down to. And one of the things that we see in almost any engagement that we have is that people invariably aren't collecting the right data. Maybe they've got it 70% correct. If they're really good, they're probably like maybe 90% correct, but usually it's not even close to that. And it's data structure, it's data schema, it's the right events with the right properties stored in the right way, so that you can answer the right questions with your data. Because as we said, is the cookie point is the misnomer, right? A cookie is just a storage device. It doesn't matter. You can store anything in a cookie that you want.
Yeah.
Are you putting the right things in the cookie? Do you know what you're going to use it for?
Yeah. And I think the other bit, right? Like we're saying cookie, but we mean cookie IDFA, right? Like really what we mean is like some identifier that's on the device, right? That you can tie back to somebody in an activity. So that it's just as important. I mean, most activities on mobile anyway these days.
Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to have Josh ask one more question, and I'll ask one more question, and we'll wrap it up. So, Josh, do you have your question ready?
Yeah, this is my favorite question, and it's because it's that this is something I always asked when I was doing my podcast with Empowering Her. But so you guys have like a wealth of knowledge at this point. You've made a ton of mistakes. You've learned from those mistakes, and you guys have been hugely successful. So if you were starting all over again, what is 1 to 2 pieces of knowledge that you would want to take to your former self that you know now?
You want to go first, Gabe? It looked like
Gabe's pointing to you.
Oh, I thought you were volunteering. Are you talking? I'm sorry.
He's on mute. Go ahead, Joshua.
It's one of those things where make mistakes. But that's the thing that I think when we're first starting off, and I know this is a very overused thing at this point, but there is a thing, and I have a young child, and I'm always teaching my young child, don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I know when I was starting off, that was a thing, always wanted to be perfect, get everything right. And what I've since learned is, in fact, it's better to get things wrong, because when you get things wrong, you learn more than getting things right. So it's a very overused, a little bit trite, but yet 100% accurate thing that I think I struggled with when I was first starting off in my goal to be perfect at everything, and had to learn to be okay with actually making mistakes and being wrong and learning from those and struggling in the process so that you learn more and that makes you smarter the next time around. So I'd almost say seek out failures, seek out mistakes, like find opportunities to take risks and then see. And in marketing, it's certainly very valuable, right? Because you got to try some stuff, but be smart about what you try and how you try and look for failure fast and recognize it. It's the whole no sacred cow thing.
Somewhere on my bookshelves, there's a book called Willing to Fail. And you have to be willing to fail. You really do. That's like it's a key to entrepreneurialism, right? Absolutely.
But I think it's true for anyone. I mean, in any role, in any organization, I think especially when you're young and you're starting out and you're trying to start a business or you're just in a role, hopefully you're encouraged to fail. I think that's certainly something that, I've learned as a parent to try to encourage my child to fail. It's something I also have always said to my teams. I've said, look, go ahead, fight and fail. Be prepared to defend your beliefs, fight for what you believe in. And if you're right, you'll win. If you can, put together the right argument and you can prove that you know what you're talking about, then you're going to be the winner in the end.
Yeah. It's a little bit more on the consulting end of it, I think, but really when we go in and we diagnose things, and I'm sure all consultants would say these same things, right? Like the way we can bucket problems. And again, you sort of learn this later, but it all ends up here is, it's people, process, and tools. Do we have a people problem? Are they the right people? Or do we have gaps in the team? Process, is this a business process problem? Again, things like KPIs, like how do you work together, ways of working, governance, which are almost like the simplest problem to solve, right? I got to select the right tool, right? It's a throw money at the problem type thing. So thinking about things and diagnosing things within those buckets, and sometimes they straddle all of those. And then from a pure tactical perspective and a get it done perspective, it's really like a decide, dissent, move on bit. So, Dern and I, we may disagree on lots of things, but if we end up with, his decision is the one that we're going with, I'll say my piece, but like whatever it is, like we'll get behind it. And of course, like sometimes it happens the other way around. Oftentimes I would argue, but so again, like having a thing where you don't get stuck in this analysis paralysis. We make a decision, we all agree to it, whatever it is, and then we get behind it and we do it. That's how we can make things function and move a little bit faster.
That's really good. So to wrap up, David, Joshua, and Gabe, if listeners were to take one thing away from this conversation, what do you think it should be?
One of my favorite anecdotes that I always think about is like when you're young and you're learning like math or logic or philosophy, and you're doing a proof, and you have a set of assumptions. You go out and you try to prove the set of assumptions. You can successfully prove a false set of assumptions, and the entire proof is still invalid. Just because you proved something doesn't make it true. So the one thing that we always say to everybody is, you start with the assumptions, the KPI conversation. That's the critical thing. When we work with companies, one of the things that we always will say is that most of the time, 99% of the time, we're not solving technical problems. We're solving business problems. And even though the solution may be a technical solution, what we're delivering and providing is ultimately code in some form or another. That's not the problem that we're solving. There's some other thing. It's because you have a need to run your business better or understand something better, or you don't know what you need to understand. So we're going to help you figure that out. Whatever it might be, it's ultimately a business problem at the core. So we always say go back to the beginning a little bit. Take a step back and understand what it is you're really trying to solve, what it is you really need, and make sure that your assumptions are the right assumptions in the first place, because you don't want to spend, and everybody does this, we all get caught in this place where we spend tons of time, money, and effort to do this thing that we never really vetted to make sure it was the right thing. And oftentimes it's because of company, organizational dysfunction, silos, the left hand not talking to the right hand, all the normal things that we've all experienced that kind of makes you end up in that place. And it just takes 1 second. And that's also why I guess sometimes it's why it's helpful to bring in outside people to come and help you with that, is to make sure you get everyone talking, everyone on the same page, you're validating those initial assumptions, and that way then you can deliver. And in practice, that ends up being things like the right data schema, data collected in the right way so that it can go to all the right systems that will then help you better analyze your customers and market to your customers and make sure the right data is getting to, the ad networks so that you're triggering off all the right things, and your exclusion lists are set up correctly and your pixels are set up correctly and kind of everything in between.
Great point.
Mine is a little bit probably simpler, and that's just really like pressure test everything with like some common sense. Like actually, like, does this make sense? You should be able to eyeball it and it should make sense to you. And all the things that are common sense things, like if I own a direct consumer business, like I should be able to get my subscribers, my churn, my LTV, my CPA. These are common sense things that I should be able to get without any pain at all. If I cannot do my job very easily. So applying this common sense sort of like, they're not even ideals, it's like what you need to do your job. And if that is complicated, then that should give you some direction into like, okay, like we've got something that we need to resolve here.
Great point.
Good stuff. I think the one thing that I would add is just that, going back to our conversation earlier about just the vast amounts of data that's accessible now, it doesn't matter, right? Who cares? What matters is what data is going to help you achieve your goals. So figure out what your goals are first, and then figure out what data you need to achieve that. Everything else is just noise.
Yeah, the insight is where the value is.
Yeah.
And the noise actually can be harmful. That's the other thing that's
distracting. Yeah.
It's not just noise; it actually is dangerous because you can get distracted or learn the wrong things, or a million other problems.
Yeah, one last anecdote on that we've seen where everyone kind of starts rallying around, like, if you're working with a video product, look how many people are pausing the video. It's like, while interesting, we should not be paying it. Like, we should be looking at something else. Like, that is an interesting piece of analysis. Like, are you getting customers? Are you filling the funnel? Is the LTV good? Are they coming on at an efficient price? Like,
we always say it's like pause is always going to be correlated to play, right? People don't play, they're going to pause. The only reason why you should ever care is if people who pause are 3 times more likely to stay with your service longer, right? Is it a signal in terms of churn risk or retention benefit, right? And if it's not, it's noise. Don't tell us.
Great point.
Yep.
Well, switching gears to wrap up here, I first want to congratulate Josh for starting with Drift. And that is Josh Morgan, our content marketer extraordinaire. So
the other Josh, he's like, wait a minute, did I?
Yes, no.
Yeah.
We're still excited that you can still participate and we still get to work with you, but we're also very excited for you in your new journey. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And then in closing, we would love to get input from listeners about our podcast, our LinkedIn Live. But are there any guests you would like to suggest? And what questions do you have that you would like us to cover? We would love to hear from you. So please send us any feedback to info@bdex.com. Share your qualitative feedback with us qualitative data with us, because we would love to make this better for you, because it's all about you. So thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Can't appreciate all the time that you spent with us in preparing for this, and also just this discussion. So we really appreciate it, Joshua and Gabe.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
Great chatting with you.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Take care.